I have never known fear the way I did the moment I set foot inside my own home after a grueling 6-month military deployment, only to sense that something was terribly wrong. My luggage still clung to the dust of foreign deserts, unworn boots weighed down with memory and sweat yet. My mind was much heavier with thoughts of my husband, Harold, and whatever surprise he might have cooked up this time. I had dreaded coming home for reasons I couldn't quite articulate. I had chalked it up to simple fatigue, the mental exhaustion that comes from constantly being in a state of alert, from sleeping lightly enough to wake at the faintest noise. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, I felt a strangeness in the air. The ambiance was all wrong, too still, too quiet, yet tinged with a secret. My mother's antique lamp, the one I'd carefully placed in a corner near the piano, was moved to the opposite wall, replaced by a large, gaudy potted plant. I frowned. I had never seen that plant before in my life. I placed my keys on the side table, the jingle echoing unnaturally in the space. And that's when I noticed something else, a pair of women's shoes by the couch. Definitely not mine. They were 2-inch pumps in bright crimson, the kind I would never wear even in my wildest dreams. Suddenly, my heart pounded against my chest like it wanted to break free. I told myself to stay calm. My father, a retired Marine, had taught me that panic never solved anything. Step back, breathe, collect. But no amount of training could have prepared me for a betrayal so personal, so close to home. My instincts screamed that a stranger had invaded my sanctuary. With purposeful strides, I walked across the living room, noticing more oddities. There was a half-empty glass of some pinkish smoothie on the coffee table. The TV remote was nowhere to be found, replaced by glossy magazines scattered haphazardly. The cushions bore the outline of bodies that had relaxed there, bodies that clearly did not belong to me. Swallowing the knot of anxiety growing in my throat, I headed to the bedroom. The door was ajar, letting in a stripe of the corridor's light. Inside, I flicked the switch, bracing for whatever I might see. My once neat closet was in disarray. Half of my clothes had been pushed to the side, replaced by outfits I had never laid eyes on: tight dresses, flowy blouses, maternity wear. My breath caught as my eyes registered the significance of that last detail: maternity wear. It was then that Harold appeared behind me, clearing his throat. I spun around, my mind reeling with disbelief. He looked older, somehow more worn out than I remembered, but that was hardly surprising. Guilt flickered across his features, but he tried to mask it with a tone of forced casualness. "You're back early," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He was holding a basket of laundry filled with more unfamiliar clothing, soft pastel tops, leggings that would stretch over a growing belly, and an assortment of lacy undergarments. None of it was mine. I couldn't form the question in my head, so it came out as a single word, a trembling exhalation. Why? He set the basket down, refusing to meet my gaze. "Look, things happened while you were away." His voice was low, defensively so. I didn't plan it like this, but it happened. I had no choice. She's pregnant with my child. My mind went blank. I stared at him, trying to will myself into believing I had misheard. But I knew exactly what he had said. Each word hammered into me, ripping through the devotion I had once felt for him. "Pregnant?" I echoed, stunned. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, which was longer than he used to keep it. "Lana, that's her name. She's carrying my baby." And she had nowhere else to go. My knees nearly gave way, but I forced myself to stay upright, to lock my stance as I had done during countless parades in my uniform. "And that justifies moving her into our house?" My voice trembled with anger, bitterness, betrayal. A flicker of resentment crossed his eyes. "You're always away, always on duty, always putting your service before us. It's like you left me with no choice." I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. I fought them back, not wanting to give him that power. "So, this is how you repay my sacrifice? By bringing another woman into our home, a pregnant mistress? And you never thought to, oh my God." I choked on the words. He muttered something under his breath that sounded like it just happened. But there was no excuse that could make sense of the clothing in my closet. the woman's shoes by the couch, the fact that she was pregnant with his child. I drew in a slow, ragged breath, every cell in my body urging me to scream, to lash out, to run. Instead, I tried to maintain composure, or at least the illusion of it. Where is she now? I managed to ask through clenched teeth. He gestured toward the guest bedroom. Sleeping, I think. She's been feeling unwell. Morning sickness and all. Of course, morning sickness. I swallowed hard. The betrayal thick in my mouth like bile. How far along is she? He hesitated. About 4 months. 4 months? That meant she got pregnant right after I left on my last deployment. Harold and I had been married for 10 years and never once had we conceived. We'd tried for a while, but the timing was always off. My tours overseas, his unpredictable work schedule life had a way of dividing us. Now, the child he never had with me was forming in another woman's womb. I felt the cold sting of heartbreak. I didn't have the strength to face this mistress yet. Not when I could barely piece together my own rage and humiliation. So I turned back to Harold. "Take me to a hotel," I ordered, my voice trembling but firm enough. "I can't stay here." He started to speak, maybe to argue, but he saw my expression. He nodded, dropping the laundry basket on the bedroom floor. "Let me get the keys." I waited by the front door, adrenaline pulsing through every inch of me. My mind was a vortex of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. How could this be happening? This was the man I had entrusted with my heart, my home, my future. Yet, in the swirl of emotion, a cold clarity took hold. This was the moment I realized everything had changed. Over the past decade, we had shared laughter, had made vows to stand by each other in sickness and health, in good times and bad. I had always believed we could weather any storm. I had left for my deployments, believing that I was protecting not only my country, but also the life I had built with Harold. Now, it seemed that while I was gone, he'd found a new occupant for my side of the bed. He returned with the car keys, pointedly avoiding my eyes. "Are you sure you don't want to talk about this now?" "No," I snapped, fists clenching at my sides. "I need time to think. I need to get out of here." He didn't argue. Silence enveloped us as we made our way to the car, my old sedan that had served me faithfully for years. I slid into the passenger seat, eyes forward, unwilling to look at him. The drive to a nearby hotel was a blur, the tension in the car thick and suffocating. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind the first time he and I had danced in our living room, the many nights I'd called home from a military base half the world away, the easy smiles we once shared. It felt as though I were watching someone else's life. When we arrived, Harold pulled up to the entrance. The roar of my own blood in my ears drowned out the city's night sounds, the hum of the neon sign, the buzz of tires on asphalt. He finally spoke, voice laced with guilt and a strange defensiveness. "I'm sorry." I opened the door and stepped out, not even bothering to look back. "Sorry isn't good enough," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he heard me. The hotel lobby welcomed me with the soft glow of lights, the gentle hum of the air conditioner. Inside, I could pretend for a moment that my entire life hadn't just collapsed. I requested a room. The receptionist, a kind-eyed woman who looked tired at this late hour, handed me a key. She didn't ask questions, and for that I was grateful. In the solitude of those neutral-colored walls, with a bed that wasn't mine, I finally let out the tears that had been threatening to spill. My sobs came in waves, unstoppable, washing over me until I was too exhausted to cry anymore. I stared at the ceiling, wishing for sleep that would not come. Hours later, as dawn began to break through the small window, I found a shaky resolve building inside me. I had been trained to handle crises, to remain resolute in the face of adversity. I told myself this was no different, just another mission, another obstacle. But it was different, infinitely more personal, more violating. I decided in that moment that I would not sit idly by while a stranger wore my clothes and slept in my bed. I might be bruised by the betrayal, but I was not defeated. One truth had become clear: I would need a plan. Whether that plan involved lawyers, a quiet separation, or a raging confrontation, I wasn't sure. But as the morning light chased away the darkness in that small, impersonal hotel room, I knew I would find a way to reclaim my life. I drifted into a restless sleep, images of Harold and his mistress swirling through my subconscious. Yet, one mantra persisted in my mind, echoing through the tears and heartbreak. I will not be broken by this. I will fight back. And maybe, just maybe, I would discover a path that led me to something better, whether that something was justice, personal rebirth, or simply the peace of being free from the lie my marriage had become. I woke to a sharp knock on the door, followed by the muffled voice of a hotel staff member announcing it was past the normal checkout time. My eyes opened reluctantly, stinging from the night's tears. A quick glance at the clock told me I had slept far longer than I intended. Pushing aside the weight of despair, I got up, splashed water on my face, and forced myself to dress in the cleanest outfit I could find in my hastily packed bag. Downstairs, I settled my bill. I had no destination in mind, no plan other than to find a decent breakfast and clear my head before facing the wreckage waiting for me at home. The truth was, I had arrived on a flight that was supposed to be a triumphant return. My mission overseas had been successful, and I'd been recognized for bravery in a tense conflict zone. But none of that mattered now. My personal life lay in shambles, overshadowing any professional achievement. I stepped into a small diner on the corner across the street from the hotel. The smell of coffee and bacon curled around me, normally comforting scents, but now they felt jarringly out of place. I took a seat by the window. The waitress, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes, refilled a customer's mug before coming over to me. "What can I get you, sweetie?" she asked, her voice gentle. I blinked, realizing I must look as bad as I felt. Without much thought, I ordered a coffee and toast. Plain, unassuming, safe. She left me alone, and I stared out the window, mind churning with questions. My phone vibrated on the table. Glancing down, I saw Harold's name. A pang of mixed emotions twisted my stomach: anger, heartbreak, a flicker of some vestigial love. I ignored the call, letting it go to voicemail. Then I noticed a text from him, sent late last night. "I'm sorry about everything. We should talk. Please come home, home." The very word felt like a slap in the face. He was the one who had turned our haven into something unrecognizable. He was the one who had broken our vows by impregnating another woman. Yet here he was, insisting we talk under the same roof where it all began. I took a long sip of coffee, its warmth doing little to calm my nerves. The toast arrived. I nibbled on it distractedly, every bite tasting like cardboard as my thoughts spun. The waitress returned, noticing the turmoil written across my face. She asked if everything was all right. I mustered a weak smile, politely lying that I was just tired from a long trip. She nodded and moved on, probably used to such half-truths from weary travelers. After finishing what little I could stomach, I left some bills on the table and stepped back outside. The sun glared down, too bright for my mood. Deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid returning to the house forever. My military background instilled a sense of responsibility. I needed to see this confrontation through. But I refused to do it unprepared. Walking to my car, I dialed the number of my longtime friend and fellow soldier, Sarah. She picked up on the second ring, her tone immediately concerned. "Hey, you're back! I was going to throw you a welcome home party. Why didn't you call sooner?" I hesitated, tears threatening again. "Things are complicated, Sarah. I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. Do you have time to meet?" Her voice softened. "Of course. Where are you?" We arranged to meet at a park not far from her home. 10 minutes later, I spotted her on a bench under a massive oak tree. She wore a casual blouse and jeans, her auburn hair in a loose ponytail. The moment I sat down, her cheerful expression morphed into concern. I told her everything: how I came home to find women's clothes in my closet, how Harold admitted to having a pregnant mistress living in our house, how he justified it by blaming my absences. With every detail, the shock in Sarah's eyes grew. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." I swallowed hard, grateful for her sympathy. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to call a lawyer, divorce him immediately, and throw them both out onto the street. But we've been married for 10 years. I can't just snap my fingers and pretend none of that happened. We had a life together. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. He's the one who betrayed you. And now he's making excuses, trying to push the blame on you for being away. That's disgusting. A wave of anger washed over me. It is. But it's still my marriage, messed up as it is. And I don't know if that mistress will leave willingly. He told me she's acting like she owns the place, refusing to leave unless I pay her relocation costs or something insane like that. Sarah's mouth dropped open. She wants you to pay her relocation costs? The nerve! I forced a weak laugh at the absurdity. Yeah, that's what Harold implied. She's saying she can't afford to find a new place on short notice, and since she's pregnant, I should have some empathy. Sarah's brow furrowed. Empathy? After she stole your husband? Some people have no shame. We sat quietly for a moment, the chirping birds sounding almost mocking in the otherwise serene park. Finally, Sarah inhaled deeply. Okay, you need a plan. Haphazard action will only make things worse. You might want to talk to a lawyer, at least to understand your rights. And let's not forget, you've got resources, friends, family, or service connections. You don't have to face this alone. I thought about my father, a proud man who had once threatened to chase off anyone who hurt his little girl. But he wasn't in the best of health these days. Dragging him into my drama felt cruel. My mother had passed away years ago, leaving only me to manage this heartbreak. I guess you're right, I murmured. I should speak to a lawyer. See what I can do. She nodded. I've got a friend from the old neighborhood, Marcus. He's a lawyer, specializes in family law. I'll give him a call if you want. I smiled gratefully, though tears threatened again. Yes, please. Thank you. Sarah pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. Within minutes, she had arranged for Marcus to meet me at his office in a couple of hours. I felt a pang of relief. Finally, a first step that felt tangible. No matter what I ultimately decided, divorce, reconciliation, or the vengeance my heart secretly yearned for, I needed to know where I stood legally. We spent the next hour talking through the situation. Sarah listened patiently, letting me vent my anger and my sadness. By the time we parted ways, I felt a little less alone, a little more prepared to face the storm. I arrived at Marcus's office, a modest suite in a nondescript building near downtown. He was a tall man with a friendly yet professional demeanor. Sarah had told him a bit about my predicament, so he ushered me into his office with a sympathetic nod. I'm sorry you're going through this, he began, offering me a seat. Infidelity is never easy, but a pregnant mistress who's moved into your home is another level of complexity. I sat down, the weight of the situation pressing on me. That's one way to put it. He opened a folder on his desk. Let's start with your rights. Do you and your husband own the house together? I explained that we did. Our mortgage was jointly held. We'd bought the place 5 years into our marriage, a symbol of our growing commitment. Now it felt tainted. Legally, you have every right to decide who lives there. If your husband invited someone without your consent, that's problematic. But if he's also on the deed, he can invite guests. Evicting the mistress could get messy. My heart sank. So I can't just force her out? He leaned back, thoughtful. It's not that straightforward. You could file for a protective order if you feel threatened, but that's a stretch. Alternatively, you can start divorce proceedings and request exclusive use of the marital home. That would at least give you legal grounds to make her leave. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Filing for divorce sounded so final. What about Harold's responsibility here? Marcus nodded. If you decide to divorce, we can address spousal support, division of assets, and so on. Infidelity can affect settlements, though it depends on the state. Some states are no fault, meaning his affair may not directly influence the property split. But the optics of him moving a pregnant mistress into your home could work in your favor if it goes to court. I shifted in my seat. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that nuclear option. Is there any middle ground? Something that pressures her to leave or forces Harold to see reason? He considered for a moment. You could try to negotiate privately, but from what you've told me, she's demanding relocation costs. That suggests she's already angling for money. You could throw some at her to get her out, but that won't fix the betrayal, and it might embolden her to ask for more. A shudder of revulsion coursed through me. The idea of paying my husband's mistress to vacate my own house felt surreal and demeaning. I don't want to pay her a dime, I muttered, bitterness creeping into my voice. She's the one who slept with my husband, Marcus sighed. I understand how that feels. Still, sometimes paying a small sum up front saves you bigger legal headaches down the road. But that's a personal decision. If you're looking for revenge, that's another story. I'm here to guide you on the legal front, not the emotional one. I forced a tight smile. Thanks, Marcus. This helps. I need to think about my next steps. He handed me his card. Call me anytime. If you decide on divorce or any kind of legal action, I'll be here. Leaving his office, I felt more informed but no less torn. My mind spun with the possibilities. Divorce was the logical choice, a clean break. But after a decade together, it felt like cutting off a limb. Reconciliation seemed unimaginable. And a part of me, a dark part I barely recognized, wanted a reckoning, something that would teach Harold and his mistress the price of betrayal. The problem was, I wasn't sure how to exact that revenge without dragging myself through the mud as well. I got back in my car, the midday sun glaring off the windshield, and tried to piece together a plan. For now, I decided I would go home my home and confront them both. Whether that led to a screaming match, negotiations, or something else entirely, I had to face them sooner or later. As I drove, the city scenery blurred into a tapestry of gray buildings and busy roads. My phone rang again, Harold's name appearing on the screen. This time, I picked up, inhaling sharply to keep my voice steady. Hey, he began, sounding contrite, but also carrying a hint of impatience. Where are you? I'm on my way home, I answered coldly. He released a breath. Good, we need to talk. Lana better not be wearing my clothes, I snapped, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface now boiling over. And she better not be in my bedroom. I'm not playing nice anymore. Just get here, he said, sounding tired. We'll figure something out. I hung up without responding. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. Figure something out? That was an understatement. The tension coiled inside me like a spring, ready to snap. When I pulled up to the house, an unwelcome sense of nostalgia rushed over me. The front porch, the flower bed, everything was as I left it. Yet everything had changed. I spotted Harold peering through the living room window, his expression unreadable. My heart pounded as I climbed the steps. This was it. The moment I would confront not just Harold, but the woman who had casually stepped into my life. I entered the house, instantly assaulted by the scent of some fruity candle that was definitely not mine. My eyes swept over the living room, noticing small changes, pillows rearranged, a new rug, fresh flowers on the coffee table. This felt like a quiet invasion, a subtle replacement of my preferences with hers. Harold stood by the archway leading to the hallway, dressed in a rumpled shirt and jeans. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good, I thought bitterly. Neither had I. Where is she? I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. He gestured toward the kitchen. She's making tea. She wants to talk. I snorted. Sure she does. Wants to tell me how she's carrying your child and how I'm the intruder here? He ran a hand over his face. Please, just keep calm. Let's talk like adults. The irony of him requesting civility after everything he'd done made me want to scream. But I held it in, stepping around him into the kitchen. There she was, Lana. She was taller than me by a few inches, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her stomach had a slight swell, just enough to confirm the pregnancy. She wore one of my old t-shirts, which stretched snugly over her form, and a pair of leggings that looked suspiciously like ones I'd left behind in a drawer. She turned to face me, a slight tremor in her eyes, but otherwise composed. Hello, she said, voice tentative. I was hoping we could talk about this situation. This situation? I repeated, my tone dripping with sarcasm. You mean you sleeping with my husband and moving into my home while I was risking my life overseas? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I understand your anger, But you were gone for so long, and Harold, don't you dare, I cut in, pointing a shaking finger. Don't you dare pin this on me. My service is not an excuse for what you two did. She swallowed, tears brimming in her eyes. I'm not excusing it, but it happened. And now I'm pregnant. This isn't just about you and Harold anymore. There's a child involved. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Yes, I'm quite aware of that. So what? You think you can stay here indefinitely? She placed the kettle down on the stovetop and looked at me with a defiance that surprised me. I can't just leave. I have no savings, nowhere to go. Harold said he would help me until the baby is born. I turned to Harold, who had followed us into the kitchen. So you offered my house, my closet, my space, without any discussion? He shifted uncomfortably. I thought it was the right thing to do at the time. She's pregnant with my child. I drew in a shaky breath, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. And what about what's right for your wife? His eyes flicked away. I messed up, but this baby is innocent. I glared at both of them, my heart pounding so loud it nearly drowned out my thoughts. Well, here's a newsflash. You can take responsibility for your child without forcing me into this twisted domestic situation. Lana folded her arms protectively over her bump. What do you propose then? I can't afford to move, especially not now. I can barely keep my job, and maternity leave isn't going to cover much. The anger roiled in my chest. Part of me wanted to throw her out immediately, but a small, conflicted part recognized she was indeed pregnant, and that child, no matter the circumstances, was innocent. There are shelters, extended stay hotels. Your predicament is not my responsibility. She bit her lip, struggling to hold back tears. I know you hate me, but you left him alone for months, years even, over the course of your deployments. Do you think that had no consequences? Her words were a slap in the face. I felt the sting of guilt over my absences, but that was my duty. A duty Harold had agreed to support when he married a soldier. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain calm. You have no idea what you're talking about. Harold knew exactly what he was getting into when we said our vows. Harold stepped between us. Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping. I felt a dangerous calm settle over me. I had to remind myself that I was trained to handle high-pressure situations. This, in its own twisted way, was another mission. Fine, I said, voice taut. I'll lay it out clearly. Either she leaves voluntarily or I'll take legal action to force her out. If you want to play house with her, Harold, then maybe you should be the one moving out. He looked stricken, torn between me and the mother of his unborn child. Let's not escalate this further. Maybe we can find a compromise. My throat burned with swallowed rage. A compromise? Do you even hear yourself? The only compromise I'll accept is her out of my house. And as for you, well, we'll talk about us later. Right now, I'm dealing with the intruder in my home. Lana lifted her chin. I'm not an intruder. Harold invited me, and if you want me gone, you'll have to pay for it. A shaky laugh escaped me, part disbelief, part fury. Pay for it? You have some nerve. She shrugged, though her posture looked fragile. I need first and last month's rent somewhere else. I need money for medical bills. Harold promised he'd help, but now that you're back, everything's uncertain. I turned to Harold, blinking back angry tears. Is this true? You promised her money? He looked pained, guilt radiating from every angle. I said I'd help support the baby. Maybe pay some expenses until she could get on her feet. I felt the last thread of my composure snap. And you planned on using our joint savings for that, I suppose? He said nothing, which was answer enough. My stomach churned with disgust. You're unbelievable. Lana looked away, perhaps feeling some semblance of remorse, or maybe just stressed by the confrontation. Harold tried one last time to diffuse the situation. Let's sit down. Talk this through calmly. I shook my head. I've heard enough. I'm going to my room, and neither of you better bother me. I'll decide on my next move soon. With that, I turned on my heel and left the kitchen, ignoring Harold's pleas. Walking down the hallway, I couldn't help but notice again the traces of Lana's presence, a sweater on a chair, a new painting on the wall. It felt as though she was slowly erasing me from my own life. I entered the bedroom, locking the door behind me. A quick scan revealed more evidence of her toiletries on the dresser, a half-finished glass of water on the nightstand. My blood boiled. I gathered her things, tossing them into a spare bag I found in the closet. The swirl of emotions threatened to overwhelm me, but I held firm, determined not to break down again in front of them. Finally, I collapsed onto the bed, numb. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the day's events, the raw confrontation, and the cold fact that my husband and his mistress seemed to consider me the interloper. Anger warred with heartbreak, but a new resolve formed in the pit of my stomach. They had started a war by violating my trust, my home, my dignity. And while I didn't know exactly what form my retaliation would take, I knew one thing: I wasn't going to roll over and surrender. If Harold and Lana wanted to play this game, I'd play to win. The stakes were my home, my pride, and my future. And as a soldier, I was trained never to lose a battle when I could still fight. It started with small acts of defiance, tiny seeds of revenge that began to sprout in my mind. I was still furious, reeling from the humiliation, and every time I glimpsed Lana's belongings or heard her voice drifting through the hallway, a wave of anger washed over me. Harold alternated between apologetic guilt and defensive frustration, as though he couldn't quite decide whether to beg for my forgiveness or resent me for disturbing his new family dynamic. The absurdity of it all nearly drove me mad. I spent the first night back in my own bedroom, barricading the door with a chair wedged under the knob. Sleep was impossible. My thoughts churned, imagining the two of them whispering in the dark, maybe discussing how best to manipulate me. The notion that I was the outsider in my own home was too jarring to accept. The next morning, I woke up with an ache behind my eyes and a deeper ache in my chest. But as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I recalled the soldier's oath I'd taken years ago to stand strong, to protect what mattered. Well, now what mattered was my dignity and my future. My tactics might be unconventional, but this was a fight. I refused to lose. Downstairs, I found Harold sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up, guilt contorting his features. "Morning," he said, voice hoarse. I ignored him at first, rummaging through the cabinets for something to eat. Lana was nowhere in sight, probably still asleep. A heavy silence thickened the air until Harold finally broke it. "Look, I know we're in a terrible situation," he began. "I never wanted it to be like this." "Really?" I shot back, slamming the cabinet door. "You seem to have a pretty clear vision when you moved her in," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I was lonely. You were gone so often. I made a mistake. A big one. But now there's a baby involved, and I have a responsibility." I scoffed, anger pricking at the corners of my mind. "You think I don't know that? Here's a thought. Why not find her a studio apartment? Pay her rent if you must, but why bring her under the same roof we once shared? Why rub my nose in your betrayal?" His eyes flickered with something like shame. "She had nowhere else to go, and I panicked. I thought maybe you'd be gone longer, that I could figure out a solution before you got back." A short, humorless laugh escaped me. "Well, surprise! I came back early." He looked down at his mug, swirling the coffee. "I'm sorry," he said again, voice hollow. The fury in my chest rose, but instead of exploding, it congealed into a cold determination. "If you're truly sorry, then fix this. Get her out of my house." He flinched. "It's not just your house. My name is on the deed, too." A trembling anger filled my throat. "Don't pull that card. You know damn well this was supposed to be our sanctuary." Before he could respond, Lana walked in. She wore a robe, mine, of course, wrapped around her pregnant belly. She hesitated upon seeing me, then held her ground. "Morning." I poured myself a cup of coffee, ignoring the tremor in my hand. My mind screamed at her audacity. She was acting like a housewife, comfortable in what was once my domain. The injustice of it all nearly made me drop the cup. "Morning," Harold murmured, looking at her with a complex mix of concern and regret. The glance he gave me afterward was desperate, as though begging for some kind of truce. But there would be no truce until she was gone. For a few agonizing minutes, the three of us existed in the same space, the silence a tangible presence. Then Lana cleared her throat. I have a doctor's appointment next week, Harold. We need to figure out how we're getting there. He nodded, face pale. Yeah, okay. I'll drive you. I felt my stomach churn. I needed to get out of there before I said or did something irreparable. Clutching my coffee mug, I retreated to the backyard, stepping onto the patio where a small table and chairs overlooked the neatly trimmed lawn. This had been my solace once. Now it felt tainted, every blade of grass whispering betrayal. Sipping my coffee, I pulled out my phone. A new text from Sarah appeared. Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up? I typed back, surviving. Barely. Got any time to talk? Within seconds, she responded. Always. Where do you want to meet? We settled on a coffee shop near her office. I placed my half-finished mug on the patio table, marched back inside careful to avoid Harold and Lana, and headed straight for my car. The drive to the cafe was a blur of raw emotion, but I felt a measure of relief when I saw Sarah waiting at a corner table, a warm smile on her face. I slid into the chair across from her, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thanks for meeting me. She reached across the table, resting a hand on mine. Of course. Talk to me. I told her about my morning, how Lana had strolled into the kitchen in my robe, how Harold had tried to act as though this was some normal domestic scenario. My voice trembled with outrage. Sarah shook her head, her own features contorting in anger on my behalf. That's insane, she said when I finished. He's basically forcing you into a bizarre love triangle you never agreed to. That's exactly how it feels, I said, choking back tears. I talked to the lawyer, Marcus. He said I could pursue legal action, maybe file for divorce and request exclusive use of the house. But I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, and it could take time. Sarah blew out a breath. I understand. Divorce is a huge step, but you can't live like this. It's toxic. I nodded, sipping my latte with shaky hands. I know. I've been thinking maybe I can make life so unpleasant for them that they leave on their own. Is that horrible? She gave me a sympathetic look. They're the ones who put you in this position. I'm not going to judge you if you want to sabotage them. A swirl of dark satisfaction welled up inside me at the thought. I could cut off the utilities in the parts of the house they use most, or maybe make sure their comfort is disrupted constantly. She blinked, considering. Just be careful. Nothing illegal or dangerous, but maybe petty annoyances could push them away, or reveal how messy this situation really is. I let my mind wander down that path. A series of small inconveniences orchestrated to show Lana exactly how unwelcome she was. Would that be enough? Would it drive her out? Or would it just make her dig in deeper, demanding more from Harold? Still, the idea offered a glimmer of empowerment. I'd felt powerless since I discovered her clothes in my closet. Maybe I needed to take back control, even if it was through subtle acts of retaliation. I'll think about it, I told Sarah. After we parted, I drove home with a new resolve. My father had once told me, when the enemy is on your turf, you either drive them out or make them regret ever stepping foot on it. Perhaps it was time to apply some of that advice. Back at the house, I found Lana in the living room, flipping through a baby catalog as if she owned the place. Harold was nowhere to be seen. Perfect. I forced a tight smile. We need to talk. She looked up, eyes slightly wary. Okay. I sat across from her, taking note of how she placed a protective hand over her belly. The movement stirred conflicting emotions in me. I couldn't ignore the child growing inside her, but I also couldn't forgive her presence in my home. I've been thinking about what you said about needing money to move out. She straightened, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Does that mean you're willing to pay me? I tilted my head, pretending to consider. I'm not sure yet. It depends on a few things. She frowned. Like what? Like how soon you'd leave, for starters, I replied. And whether you're planning to drag Harold into a paternity suit if he doesn't comply with all your demands. Her gaze hardened. He's the father. He should support his child. Whether that's through a formal suit or not depends on how cooperative he is. I swallowed the bile in my throat. I see. Well, I'll talk to Harold about the finances. But if I do give you anything, it will be minimal. Enough for you to find a small place. Don't expect luxury. She pressed her lips together, eyes drifting down to the catalog in her lap. Anything is better than nothing. A strange sense of triumph mingled with disgust. I hated the idea of paying her, but maybe money was the simplest way to get her out of my life. Then Harold and I could at least talk about what came next without her looming in the background. Over the next few days, I enacted my plan of petty sabotage. I set the water heater on a timer so that hot water would cut off unexpectedly. I rearranged the pantry so that Lana's snacks disappeared or were moved to unreachable shelves. I locked certain cabinets, claiming I had misplaced the keys. Whenever she left her laundry in the washing machine, I'd accidentally turn it on again, mixing colors or using the wrong cycle until her clothes came out stretched or faded. Nothing I did was outright illegal. It was more an endless series of minor inconveniences. Lana grew visibly frustrated, her brow furrowing each time she encountered a new issue. Harold noticed too, casting suspicious glances my way. But he said nothing, torn between his guilt toward me and his responsibility to her. At night, I blasted music at odd hours, ensuring Lana's rest was disturbed. I turned the thermostat down just enough to make the house uncomfortably chilly. I gave subtle hints that her presence was not just unwelcome, but actively hostile. Let her see how it felt to be the unwanted guest. Sarah was my only confidant, listening to my stories of sabotage with a mixture of amusement and concern. Just make sure you don't cross a line you can't come back from, she warned gently. I won't, I promised, though part of me wondered how far I'd be willing to go if it meant driving that woman out. Yet, despite the relentless annoyances, Lana didn't leave. She huffed and complained, mostly to Harold, who tried to appease her. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the hallway. I can't live like this, Lana hissed, voice trembling. She's making my life miserable. Harold's tone was strained. I know, but what can I do? She's my wife. She has rights, and she's not exactly thrilled about the situation. Then why not get rid of her? Offer her a settlement. Or, she's the one with a stable income, Lana, he whispered. I'm only contracted part-time right now. We rely on her paycheck for most of the bills. Lana fell silent, the weight of that truth settling between them. I felt a grim satisfaction hearing it. Let them realize how tenuous their position was. I had the financial advantage. I was the one who kept this household afloat even in my absence. But as time wore on, my petty tactics began to wear on me too. I found myself on edge, constantly scheming, hyper-aware of every move they made. My life revolved around this vendetta. I barely slept, my nerves fraying like old rope. Even my job performance began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate, haunted by the tension waiting for me at home. Sarah noticed my deteriorating state and confronted me one evening. You're turning into someone else, she said gently. I get that you're angry, but is this constant conflict worth it? I don't know, I admitted, tears threatening for the first time in days. I just can't let them win. You're losing yourself in this war, she said, pulling me into a supportive hug. Maybe it's time to take a different approach. Think about your long-term goals. Do you really want to stay in a marriage that's become so toxic? Her words lingered in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. My vengeance had taken over every aspect of my life. I was tired of playing cat and mouse in my own house, tired of seeing Harold and Lana steal glances at each other, tired of feeling like a stranger in what was once my sanctuary. So one day, I made a decision. I'd talk to Harold frankly, no more sabotage, no more petty warfare. I'd lay out my terms. If he wanted any chance of salvaging even a shred of our relationship, Lana had to go. And if he refused, I'd leave, initiating the divorce he seemed so desperate to avoid. One way or another, this standoff would end. That afternoon, I waited until Lana left for a prenatal appointment she had arranged with a friend apparently. She couldn't stand my sabotage any longer and had asked a coworker to drive her. I found Harold alone in the kitchen, washing dishes. It struck me as ironic. Once upon a time, we'd teased each other about chores, each trying to pick up the slack for the other. Now, everything felt forced, joyless. "We need to talk," I said quietly, sitting at the table. He shut off the tap, turned around, and leaned against the sink. "All right." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I can't live like this anymore. This house feels poisoned. I'm either going to lose my mind or destroy myself trying to push her out. So here's my ultimatum. If you want even a remote chance of saving this marriage, you have to make her leave. You pay her relocation expenses if you must, but she can't stay here another day. His face tightened. "She's pregnant, you know? It's not so simple. I don't care. If you're serious about taking responsibility, rent her a place across town, pay child support when the baby's born. Do what you need to do. But I won't tolerate her here anymore. It's one or the other, Harold. Me or her." He placed his hands on the counter, his knuckles going white. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "Yes," I said, my voice unyielding. "I deserve that much. After everything you've done, this is the least you owe me." He bowed his head, the tension in his shoulders palpable. "And if I say no?" My stomach lurched. "Then I leave, and we file for divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm done living in a state of constant stress." Silence spooled out between us. I could hear the humming of the refrigerator, the drip of the faucet, the pounding of my own heartbeat. Finally, Harold spoke, voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "That's the irony, isn't it? You claim you didn't want to hurt me, yet you made every choice that would. Now it's time for you to fix it." He swallowed hard, lifting his gaze to meet mine. In his eyes, I saw regret, desperation, and perhaps even a flicker of the love we once shared. "I'll tell her she has to go." Relief washed over me, mingled with disbelief. I had half expected him to defend her again, to cling to this twisted scenario. "You promise?" He nodded slowly, eyes heavy with resignation. "Yes. I'll find her a place, cover what I can. But you have to understand, it's not like I can abandon her. She's carrying my child." I bit my lip, forcing myself to accept that harsh truth. The child complicated everything, but at least I wouldn't have to share my living space with them. "I understand. As long as she leaves," he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "She's not going to be happy." "I don't care. She had no right to be here in the first place." His shoulders slumped. "All right. I'll talk to her tonight after her appointment. I'll break the news and start looking for apartments." I nodded, feeling a wild cocktail of emotions swirl in my chest. Relief, triumph, sadness, even guilt. Part of me pitied Lana, who had believed she could build a life with Harold under my roof. But my loyalty was to myself first. I refused to sacrifice my sanity for her comfort. I stood up, my knees weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. "I'm going to stay at a friend's place tonight. Text me when you've talked to her." He looked pained. "You don't have to leave." "Yes, I do," I insisted. "I can't be here when you break it to her. I'm done with the drama." I grabbed my purse, brushed past him, and headed for the front door. A strange sense of liberation accompanied me as I stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to sink, casting long shadows across the lawn. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. Perhaps this war was finally coming to an end. Yet, as I climbed into my car, another truth settled over me. This would be the beginning of a new battle, one I'd have to fight inside myself. I had forced Harold to choose me over his mistress, at least under our shared roof. But could I ever forgive him for what he'd done? Could our marriage survive such a betrayal? My mind raced with questions as I drove away, leaving the house in my rearview mirror. I reminded myself that first I needed space, time to breathe. Only then could I decide whether I truly wanted to remain with a man who had shattered my trust so completely. The path ahead was unclear, but at least I was no longer drowning in that toxic environment. Sometimes victory in war isn't the sweet triumph you imagine. Sometimes it's simply the chance to catch your breath and choose your next step. For now, that would have to be enough. I stayed at Sarah's apartment that night, my nerves on edge as I waited for Harold's update. We ordered takeout Thai curry that tasted like nothing to me, thanks to the roiling tension in my stomach. Sarah tried to keep the conversation light, sharing details about her own life, her new project at work, her weekend plans. But I could see the concern etched into her features. She kept glancing at my phone, waiting for the moment it would buzz with news. Finally, shortly after 10 o'clock, my phone chimed. I snatched it from the table, breath catching. Harold's text read simply, "She's furious, but she'll leave in a few days, looking for an apartment." I'm sorry. Relief flooded me, mingled with dread. In a few days, she would be gone, assuming she actually followed through. Yet I suspected this victory would feel hollow. No matter how quickly she packed her bags, the damage was done. Sarah offered a comforting smile. At least that's progress. I nodded, tears unexpectedly blurring my vision. Yeah, I guess so. My voice cracked, betraying the storm of emotions inside me. She pulled me into a warm hug, and for a moment, I let myself break, sobbing quietly into her shoulder. The next morning, I headed to work, determined to keep my personal crisis hidden beneath a veneer of professionalism. Yet my mind wandered. I pictured Lana packing her belongings, the baby clothes she'd hung in my closet removed at last. I pictured Harold bearing the brunt of her anger, maybe even feeling a twinge of regret or sorrow. Days passed in a tense limbo. I stayed away from the house, sleeping at Sarah's or sometimes at a cheap motel if I felt like giving her space. I wanted to believe everything was going according to plan, but a gnawing doubt lingered. Would Lana truly leave? On the third day, Harold called, insisting I return home in the evening. "She's going," he said, voice subdued. "She's packing up now. I think you should be here. She wants closure or something like that." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Closure?" She broke into my life. "I owe her nothing," he sighed. "I know you don't, but I'd like us to talk. If we're going to move forward, we need to do it without lingering hostility." My throat tightened. The idea of having one final confrontation with Lana was repulsive. But maybe this was necessary, one last purge of the poison. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll come." When I arrived at the house, I found the living room littered with half-packed boxes. Lana stood among them, dressed in a loose-fitting shirt and sweatpants. Her eyes were puffy, as if she'd been crying. Harold hovered by the couch, watching us both with apprehension. I stepped inside, crossing my arms over my chest. "You're leaving tonight?" She nodded, lifting her chin in a show of bravado. "Yes, Harold helped me find a small one-bedroom about 15 minutes from here. It's not ideal, but it'll do." I wanted to feel triumph, but all I felt was a deep exhaustion. "Good," she swallowed. "I know you hate me, and I know I can't change that, but for what it's worth, I didn't plan any of this." I stared at her, fury warring with pity. "I'm sure you didn't, but you could have walked away the moment you learned he was married." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I tried, at first. But then I found out I was pregnant. I was scared. I wanted to laugh at the irony she was scared, yet she'd felt no hesitation taking over my home. But I held my tongue, unwilling to spiral into another screaming match. Whatever. It's over now," she nodded, tears still glistening. "I'll be gone soon. I wish things hadn't gone this way." Harold stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. She flinched, then shrugged it off. "I'll load the boxes," he muttered, heading outside to where his car waited, trunk open. Suddenly, I found myself alone with Lana. She watched me, eyes brimming with raw emotion. "He does love you, you know," she said, voice trembling. "He told me he never stopped, even when he was with me." A rush of hot anger flooded me. "He has a funny way of showing it." She bowed her head, fingers twisting in the hem of her shirt. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. But please, don't punish the child. This baby didn't choose any of this." A lump rose in my throat. "I know, and I won't. But That doesn't mean I have to welcome you both into my life. She blinked, tears trailing down her cheeks. I understand. We stood there in tense silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. In another life, under different circumstances, maybe we could have had some strange form of empathy for each other. But too much had transpired. The chasm between us felt insurmountable. Eventually, Harold returned, picking up a couple of boxes. Lana followed him out. I heard the slam of the trunk, the low murmur of voices. Then she came back inside for one last glance around. Finally, without another word, she walked out, gently closing the front door behind her. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of the car engine revving, tires crunching on the driveway. And then they were gone. She was gone from my house, which now felt eerily quiet, as if exhaling after weeks of strain. Harold re-entered, shutting the door behind him. We stared at each other, strangers in our own home. It's done, he said softly, breaking the silence. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. Yeah, he shoved his hands into his pockets, looking lost. I want you to know I'm going to support the baby. I don't expect you to. I know, I interrupted, my voice hoarse. It's your responsibility. I'm not going to stand in your way. He nodded, relief mingling with sorrow in his expression. Thank you. I know I messed up more than words can say. I never meant for any of this to happen. I let out a shaky breath, crossing my arms again. Words won't fix this, Harold. I don't know if anything can. A flicker of panic crossed his face. But we can try, right? I mean, we have a decade together. That has to count for something. I swallowed hard, my emotions churning. I don't know, I'm exhausted. We might need therapy, a separation, something. I can't just pretend everything's all right. He stepped closer, hesitating. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, going to church, signing a postnuptial agreement, name it. I just don't want to lose you. His desperation tugged at something in me. Once, I had loved him with all my heart. We'd shared dreams, laughter, plans for a future. Yet now, trust lay shattered at our feet. Could it be rebuilt? Should it be? I thought of the baby growing in Lana's womb, the living reminder of Harold's betrayal. I need time, I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. Time to figure out if I can ever forgive you. He nodded, tears brimming in his own eyes. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. In the days that followed, the house felt both strange and familiar. Lana's scent lingered, but slowly dissipated as I aired out the rooms, opened windows, laundered sheets, and rearranged furniture back to where it belonged. I removed every trace of her presence, determined to reclaim my space. Harold tried to help, but I mostly pushed him away, preferring the solitude of my own anger. He gave me space, sleeping in the guest room where Lana had once slept, while I occupied the master bedroom. Each night I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was making the right choice by staying. Part of me longed to run, to file the divorce papers and start anew. Another part of me remembered the good times, the marriage that once was, the possibility of healing. Sarah visited often, offering her unwavering support. Whatever you decide, she told me, just make sure it brings you peace. You deserve that. Eventually, Harold and I agreed to attend couples therapy. In the cramped office of Dr. Lawson, we spilled our pain, our anger, our regrets. Harold confessed that he had felt abandoned, though he hated himself for feeling that way. He begged for my forgiveness, admitting that nothing justified his betrayal. I was forced to confront my own guilt had I neglected our marriage with my deployments, overlooked Harold's emotional needs. While that was no excuse for what he'd done, it was a painful realization that perhaps I'd been too focused on my career, assuming our love was unbreakable. Weeks turned into months. Harold continued to support Lana financially, attending some doctor appointments, though he no longer lived under the illusion that they could be a family. Our therapy sessions uncovered a raw honesty we'd never had before, forcing us to reevaluate what we truly wanted. Some days, I was convinced divorce was inevitable. Other days, I glimpsed a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. During one particularly poignant session, Dr. Lawson asked each of us to envision a future where forgiveness was possible. What would that look like? She pressed. Harold spoke first, voice trembling. I see us together again, traveling, laughing like we used to. I see us stronger, having survived this nightmare and come out the other side. She turned to me and I swallowed hard. I'm not sure I can see that yet. All I see is the pain, but if I try really hard, I see myself letting go of the anger, finding peace, maybe love again. But that will take time. Time was indeed the critical factor. Meanwhile, the baby was born. Lana named her daughter Sophia, a small, delicate infant with a tuft of dark hair. Harold visited the hospital, holding his newborn child for the first time. He came home afterward, eyes red with emotion, telling me how beautiful she was. I want you to know, he said, voice wavering, that my love for our marriage is separate from my responsibility to Sophia. I'm going to be in her life, but it doesn't change what I feel for you. A swirl of emotion filled me. This child was innocent, yet her existence was a constant reminder of Harold's betrayal. Still, I found a small measure of peace in the knowledge that Harold intended to be a good father, even if our marriage couldn't survive. Months stretched on, therapy sessions piling up. Gradually, my anger thawed, replaced by a cautious vulnerability. I watched Harold make genuine efforts to mend what he'd broken. He respected my boundaries, allowed me the final say in decisions around the house, and accepted my fluctuating moods with patience. One evening, I found him sitting in the living room, staring at an old photo album. It was full of pictures from our early days, our wedding, our first apartment, the trip to Europe we'd taken on a whim. Tears glistened in his eyes as he turned the pages. I hesitated before joining him on the couch. He looked up, startled, then offered a tentative smile. Together, we flipped through the album, memories bursting forth like blossoms in spring. The laughter we once shared, the hopes and dreams etched into each snapshot. I felt a knot in my throat. We were so happy, I murmured. He nodded, voice choked. I want that again. I'm so sorry I threw it all away. I closed the album gently. It's not gone forever, but it won't ever be the same. Over the next few weeks, something shifted. I caught glimpses of the man I'd fallen in love with, the gentle humor, the unwavering support. He no longer made excuses for his actions. Instead, he owned them fully, determined to prove he could change. One day, as I was packing for a short business trip, not a deployment, just a week's conference, he approached me, eyes solemn. I know we still have a lot to work on, but I want you to know, no matter how long you're gone or where you go, I will never again betray your trust. I searched his gaze, looking for deception or half-truths, but all I saw was earnest repentance. I hope that's true, I said softly, zipping my suitcase. He nodded, stepping aside as I headed for the door. Have a safe trip. I'll be here when you get back. It was a small exchange, but it carried weight. In that moment, I realized that part of me still yearned for a future with him, tentative, fragile yet alive. The anger no longer consumed me. By the time my conference ended and I returned home, Harold had surprised me by renovating our spare room, converting it into a home office for me, with pictures of our travels hung on the walls, a fresh coat of paint in a soothing color, and even a small nook for reading. I thought you deserved a space that's just yours, he said, fidgeting nervously as he showed me around. A symbol that this is your home, that you belong here. Emotion welled up in my chest. In the past, a gesture like this might have seemed ordinary. Now it felt profound, a reflection of genuine effort to make amends. I stepped into the room, running my hand over the new desk. Thank you, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. His arms slid around me, hesitant, seeking permission. I didn't pull away. Instead, I rested my head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat that once lulled me to sleep. For the first time since I set foot in that house and discovered the horrifying truth, I felt something akin to safety. We still had a long way to go. Trust, once shattered, doesn't repair overnight. There would be challenges, Sophia's milestones, co-parenting boundaries, lingering jealousy. But for the first time, I believed in the possibility of a new kind of happiness, forged in the fire of betrayal yet tempered by forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Harold and I continued therapy, learned new ways to communicate, and carefully navigated the intricate dynamics of his fatherhood. He set up child support and scheduled visits with Sophia, always transparent with me about his plans. Lana, for her part, seemed resigned to a cordial arrangement, focusing on her new life as a single mother. Eventually, I found it within me to let go of the poisonous anger. It didn't mean forgetting what happened, but rather accepting that the past couldn't be changed and choosing not to let it define my future. Harold and I began, in our own halting way, to rebuild. 6 months after Lana moved out, Harold surprised me with a small anniversary gift, an engraved bracelet that read, "Stronger Together." It was a risk, acknowledging our wounded marriage, but also celebrating the resilience we'd shown. I slipped it onto my wrist, tears gathering in my eyes. "Do you believe it?" he asked softly. "That we can be stronger together." I looked at the bracelet, then at him. "I'm starting to." We embraced, the moment heavy with both sorrow and hope. And in that quiet moment of closeness, I felt a spark of genuine optimism. We had survived the unimaginable. Maybe we could emerge on the other side not as the same couple, but as a stronger version of ourselves, scarred. Yes, but not defeated. Life, I realized, doesn't always give happy endings wrapped in neat bows. But sometimes, the happy ending is simply the chance to heal, to move forward without bitterness, and to find a way to trust again. For me, it meant giving Harold and us a second chance. Perhaps one day I would look back on this chapter of my life and see not just betrayal, but a testament to my strength and willingness to rebuild. And so the story didn't end with Lana's departure or the final therapy session. It continued, evolving day by day, shaped by choices both big and small. My husband had betrayed me, and I had waged a private war of revenge in my own home. But in the end, the real victory lay in finding peace and the hope of love rekindled when all seemed lost. No, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real and it was mine. For the first time since I set foot in that house and discovered the horrifying truth, I felt the stirrings of genuine happiness in my heart. And for now, that was enough.